Hi, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of Table 21. Today, my guest is Michael Morris. And I think he'll tell me, I think he likes to be called Mike, but I'm not sure. I've been calling him Michael because we don't know each other that much. Michael has a company called CANAdev, and he basically works with a lot of retail, but a lot of restaurants. And I'd heard him on a clubhouse. At a clubhouse we were a couple of months ago. We jumped on a call. I thought it was a very interesting conversation. And usually on Table 21, I speak more with restaurant operators and people maybe closer to operations, which Michael kind of is, even though that's not the core of what he does. But from his unique perspective, I thought it would be amazing to have him on and to be able to dig maybe more even on the development side, the other side of operations sometimes. And I think he's got some unique points of views and some great insights that he can share with us. So without any further ado, let me bring him in. And hi, Mike. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for joining us today. Like I said, we'll jump into what you do, and maybe you can explain it better than I can, because I think there's a lot of different components to what you do. But every time I hear you or I talk to you, I learn new things, and I'm even right before we went on air, you were sharing about some of the opportunities you had to travel and all that, and I just think it's very insightful. But before we get going, just for our audience to get to know you a little bit, I want to play a little game of this or that with you. So I'm going to throw a couple of quick options for you. I'm curious to even for myself to get to know you a little more. So let's do this or that. You ready to do that with me?
Let's go.
Sounds good. We do a lot of text messages these days. A lot of people don't like to jump on the phone. When we talk about text, are you more words or emoticons?
I generally don't like text.
You don't like text? You're a phone kind of guy.
I would much rather talk to somebody on the phone.
Let's get it cleared out.
That's my wife. I am not a good responder of text.
That's amazing. My partner, I'm very like send an email, send a text, and my partner in piecemeal has been, Chris, get him on the phone, get the answer, get the information right away, right? Otherwise it can get lost.
It's so difficult, particularly in this day and age. So many people are so quick to respond. And it's a world of instantaneous everything, right? In the things that we do, so much tone is important, and being able to align your interest and empathize with someone and try to figure things out, right? Because at my level, ultimately, when I'm getting involved in things, it's traditionally because others haven't been able to figure it out. And so I think you just have to talk to people, frankly.
Yep. That makes sense. I mean, we're used to instant gratification, but it doesn't necessarily, people think it's quicker, but sometimes there's more back and forth. And it's true that you're so right. One thing I've found is there's so much interpretation in what the words or even, the little images can mean. So talking to people, you're sure that the tone is so important for sure. Another this or that, jogging or gym?
Neither. I'm really sucking at this. This is not a good game, I guess, for me. Well, so I'm like failing, I feel like.
Not at all.
I play, I coach a lot. So I spend a lot of time on a lacrosse field and I spend a lot of time on a soccer field. But as far as working out, I much prefer, competitive sports. So, I play a lot of tennis, pickleball, looking forward to picking up paddle soon. I find that it's so much more in fun, right, and enjoyable when you're doing something A, with someone, and B, getting a workout and socializing.
Like it's work, right? It doesn't feel like I'm working out. I'm actually having fun, but there's benefits to it at the same time.
Exactly. Yes.
I love it. Chips or ice cream?
Ice cream.
Ice cream, man. You more Netflix or YouTube?
Spend a lot of time on. I probably spend more time on YouTube, but I like Netflix more.
Yeah. Do you go into these kind of rabbit holes in YouTube? Like I tend to do that. Like I look on something for specific subject, or often it's for work, but then I go to the next video and the next one and the next one, and I can waste a lot of time like that.
I waste way more time in that kind of stuff on Pinterest, believe it or not, than I spend on YouTube. YouTube, I tend to have very specific things I'm looking for, whether it's something about a city or a property that we're looking at, or a restaurant, or something cultural that we're trying to learn about or think about, or lacrosse videos or soccer videos and trying to educate myself on what's going on and what's out there.
Well, we'll talk about what you do in a sec, but obviously if you're in development, and you're probably, Pinterest is a great way to find new ideas and see what your trends are, and I guess keep in touch with what's happening. So that would make sense that Pinterest would be a go-to for you. Are you more beach or mountain?
Beach.
Beach? Yeah, I can't wait to hit a beach personally, I must say.
We're hearing that the beach right now, like in the US, particularly on the East Coast, the reservations are through the roof this summer. I think people are just done, right? They're just mentally done. They're pent up. They want to go out, and everybody gets the idea that outside is easier, certainly safer. And beach is kind of something that people didn't really do last year a whole lot. So we're excited to get back. Pretty
crazy. I'm based in Montreal in Canada, and borders closed with you guys. A lot of people from Quebec here travel to the East Coast, to Maine, to New Hampshire, and everybody had to stay here last year. And there's a region called Gaspésie, and it was like they saw like something like 4 or 5x the amount of people they usually see in the summer. And even this year, you can't rent a cottage in Quebec right now because everything is so crazy. But I know a lot of people are eager to go down and see some of your beaches when it reopens. So, but I think it would probably be too busy with folks locally in the US just going to the beach. So, and my last question, it's funny you have a cup. So the last one would be tea or coffee?
Coffee. I mean, I'm an equal opportunist when it comes to caffeine, but I definitely drink coffee, but I drink it black. So hopefully that's supposed to be reasonably good for you in moderation.
Yeah, for sure. As long as it's not 10, 12 cups a day, you'll probably be okay.
Yeah, I try to stay under 4.
I used to do 1 a day, and since I've been working back from home in the basement here, I've gone up to like 3 a day, and I try to cap it at 3, 4 too. But I've been abusing that a bit. Thanks for playing my little game. Can you share with us what you do? You created CANAdev, I believe, about 12 years ago. Am I wrong? 11, 12 years ago?
14 now.
14, sorry. So
13.
Sorry?
13.
13. So 2007, 2008. 2008?
2008.
What do you do? And then I'm curious to go a little deeper into some of the stuff, because the first time I spoke to you, I thought that was really interesting.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I guess it's important to understand first that our product has changed over the years, in that our how we connect with the consumer has evolved. We like to say we're process focused, we're product agnostic, right? When I started the company, 13 years ago, we were very heavily focused in executing entertainment districts throughout the United States. We were also focused on tenant and landlord representation, and involved a lot in restaurants on our own. And that's continually evolved to where we are today. And today, CANA development really focuses on 2 things. Very, very large scale mixed use development, where we come in essentially as the retail placemaking expert. In this day and age, vertical development has become so subspecialized. There are groups that only execute, 5/2 affordable housing. There's groups that only do 120 to 130 key, limited service hotel product. And in these larger scale mixed use developments, not everybody interacts with the 10th floor of the office building or the 5th floor of the hotel. Everyone interacts with the ground floor. And it's largely what creates the sense of place, what sets the value and the overall kind of feel for that community and neighborhood. And master planner, owner, property owners have realized that, it's a vital component to successful long-term development. And we get brought in to be the glue that ties all those things in together. And we can execute from ideation all the way through programming and activation of the site on an ongoing basis. The other side of the company is focused on food halls and public markets. We've essentially become one of the largest food hall development companies, if not the largest in the United States that I'm aware of. We have 7 markets that are open and operating. We have 2 more that are waiting in the wings, desperately to open. And we're holding them back for obvious reasons. We have 14 more under construction and development at the moment, and a list growing behind that. When you really think about it, we create places that people want to spend time in, where they feel as comfortable as they're in their own home, but know that they could never have that environment anywhere else. And that, by definition, is a destination, right? And by doing it that way, it can't really be replicated. It's a white label. It's unique to that time and place. And the only difference really between our food hall development and our large scale mixed use development is scale. It's the same process of creating unique places that improve and support the communities that we serve, do creative work, and we make money at it. We kind of in that order of importance. And when you can do that, you're probably on to something. Yeah. And we've been very lucky, and we have a lot of really good partners across the country, and we've delivered. And when you deliver, you typically get more work.
Yeah.
And we've continued to build a great team. Geographically, we go as far north as Boston, Massachusetts right now. We go as far south as Boca Raton, Florida, and we go out west to Kansas City. And we're continuing to look at projects actively in Colorado, California at the moment. And from a restaurant perspective, for what it's worth, I've owned up to 20. I've had 27 restaurants. We're still actively involved in a number of restaurants. 7 currently that we're actively involved in. We have a small chain as an example of Southern inspired diner concept that we're actively involved in helping both as an owner, investor, and handling their real estate. We have another number of other businesses. And then on the food hall side, we have 179 vendors active in our portfolio. That number will likely go up by almost 100 this year. We did not open any food halls in 2019, but our construction and development and leasing didn't stop. So we have several projects just waiting to open, and we have a number of projects that were scheduled to open this year and are basically on schedule at the moment.
That's amazing. Couple of things I want to break down in there. So just to be clear for people who may not be from your world, basically, in most cases, you have a landlord. Basically, somebody's building something. They're growing a building. They want to have, especially you were saying in your case, basically focusing on the ground floor, but they want to have a unique experience when it comes to retail. What kind of shops? What kind of restaurant? Is it a food hall? And then you basically are, obviously can vary, and I'm sure that your implication can vary in these projects depending. But basically, you'll help them establish and basically bring that to life. Is kind of what you'll do.
Yeah. We basically act as the owner's rep. Yeah. And we manage the entire process from creating the idea to merchandising, right? Figuring out which merchants, which tenants go where and why. Yeah. That's part creative science, in that, there's certain human metrics that we know. Humans naturally tend to turn right when they enter a space. Yeah. There's certain science that we know that, certain vendors do better near other vendors. There are certain spaces that impulse vendors do better than others. Some of it's just art, and finding unique creative ideas and figuring out how to put deal structures together to execute and allow them to happen in those spaces. And taking it through design, taking it through construction, and then programming and activation. In this day and age, retail is no longer a commodity, right? You can't build something and lease it out as the landlord and collect rent for 10 years and come back to it. Retail is a service, and we have to provide a continual experience to our customer in order to compete with the online profile, to compete with, the retail around the corner, and frankly, the retail around the country. In this day and age, pre-COVID in particular, people travel. If you wanted a great dining experience, or you wanted a great retail operation and it wasn't in your hometown, cost of travel is very inexpensive in general now, and rather convenient and accessible. So you really have to create a unique destination to be successful in the retail industry. Fortunately, the majority of our business is focused on food, right? And until I joked around the other day, until they've created smell-o-vision and taste-o-vision, our business, largely food-based, has a little bit of protection against internet, right? And how sales have been moving online. But we still have to be thoughtful about that, and it does have an impact on what we're doing and the accessibility of our customer to our product.
Yeah. That's a really good point. How has that changed in 12, 13 years we've been doing this? I'm guessing, late 2000s, early 2010s, was it a lot more retail with a bit less food? And has it gone to food as a lot of stuff has gone online? I'm guessing the amount of food versus traditional retail, have you seen a big shift in the last 10 years?
Yeah. The world is cyclical, right? Yeah. And when I first got into real estate, which was in the early 2000s, it's kind of the height of the lifestyle shopping center. It was the height of the big box. the tenant that came in, taking and dominating, 30 to 60,000 square feet and being a catch-all in that market, in that space, right? So the likes of Best Buy and Circuit City dominated, the electronics world. And essentially really what had happened, right, is they took a portion of the department store and they blew it up and offered thousands of SKUs and a one-stop shop for that particular product and selection. Then what happened, right, is that the reality is because of logistics and because of the industrial kind of changes in the real estate portfolio, those vendors didn't need that space anymore. What was a 30, 40, 50,000 square box, now it could be scaled down to 5 or 10,000 square feet and, direct shipped to your home, and you didn't have to pick it up. You could still see everything, but you didn't have to manage all the delivery and everything. So early on, the lifestyle centers were dominated by these large scale boxes and then the retail that supported it. And as those boxes started to squeeze and get smaller, we saw food and beverage growing, right? Yeah. And picking up a lot of the pieces that the retailers left, as well as entertainment concepts, right? The likes of Punch Bowl Social and unique creative artistic concepts like Art to House or Mayo Wolf now that we're seeing go through growth phases as we speak. And we're now seeing, fast forward to the full circle, you're seeing a likely resurgence of what we would define as a department store, and that bringing the collection of shop and shops, mini stores inside of a larger box to create a more diverse, unique collection of retail in a meaningful way happening again. And so I think those retailers have to be more thoughtful. There's that combination of making sure it's right sized and that they figured out things like logistics and, truly a connection with their consumer in a meaningful online and offline way. But I think food and beverages can continue to dominate coming out of COVID. And the other major kind of change, right, is that middle piece, because of the internet, you've seen continued support on the luxury side of both retail and food and beverage. Mm-hmm. You've seen continued support on the commodity side of both retail and food and beverage. You've seen the middle piece, right? The full service 4,000 to 6,000 square foot restaurant focused on casual mid markets get kind of squeezed for a number of reasons. And too much competition, too many seats in the average market, not a great margin business for a number of reasons, and too much competition and not enough support.
Very interesting. And I'm curious, while we're there, basically you build food halls, right? So a lot of times are these common spaces where design wise are very different than the traditional food court, right? The used to be the food court with the chains that were there. How do you see that change, right? The food hall, it seems the quality has gone up. A lot of times it's unique concepts. I don't know if that's your case or if it's a mix of both, but based in Montreal here, they opened up 3 food halls within the period of 4 months. There was none, and they opened up 3, which didn't operate very long, unfortunately, because of what happened last year. But the focus from what I've seen here is higher quality, a lot of local chefs that have the established restaurants that come and do a counter in the food hall and all that. We're really going away from the classic food court of, there's a McDonald's, there's a different types of concept that are usually the same if you go into a mall. But is that what you've seen as well? Like when you're talking food hall, is it more of that kind of centralized experience, or how have you, or are they different concepts from what you've developed and what you work with?
I think that it's a great question, and I think it's important, right? Because there's a lot of misnomer in the how things are defined, right? And so from our perspective, a food hall is about uniqueness, diversity, and ease. Yeah. And it starts there, right? There are 2 major philosophies on food halls. One is what I would call a branded approach. Urban Space, the Politan Group would be good examples of that, where, there's a lot of similarities from one of theirs to the next, or Time Out, from a merchandising, from a design, from a feel, from a finish perspective. We have a different approach. We like to say that we're white label, in that every single one of our markets is uniquely designed for that time, place, location, partner, project, et cetera. I think there's an opportunity. Both models can work. one's not necessarily better than the other. There are strengths and weaknesses to both.
Yeah.
I think, selfishly, I think ours has more strengths and weaknesses. But that's just my opinion.
That's why you're doing that, right?
Right. But I think a food hall, to compare to a food court, right? So a food court, by definition, is rectilinear, right? It's square. Traditionally, the vendors are on the outside, surrounding a core area of seating, centralized. There's no sense of discovery, meaning you walk into the space, you can see all the vendors, you can see all the seating, you know where all the trash cans are. There's no sense of discovery in the fact that majority of the vendors are well-known, established brands that, frankly, you could get somewhere else.
Anywhere else.
There's no uniqueness in that regard, right? And there's a food court. There is an ease to it, meaning that, like, generally speaking, you can find something, but it's not quite as diverse and therefore not quite as easy from a consumer perspective as a food hall, right? Food hall has this sense of discovery where I can't see everything the second I walk into it. I have to kind of meander through the space to really take it all in and be engaged in the environment that I'm surrounded by, be engaged by the people that are there and their product. There's a uniqueness to it, right? The majority of our vendors, the brands that are in our food halls are unique and they only exist in that location. And the majority of our vendors, frankly, over 62% of our vendors are women and minority-owned businesses. It's an incredible opportunity for a small business to kind of have a proof of concept and be very successful at the same time with fairly low turnover. Pre-COVID, we were, sub 10% a year in turnover. And in the food and beverage industry, that's pretty incredible, frankly. Yep. And even through COVID, frankly, we've had very little turnover, but that, we'll see. After the sense of discovery, it's at ease, right? Because it doesn't matter your dietary restriction. It doesn't matter your ethnicity. It doesn't matter the size of your party. It could be just you. It could be you with 25 of your friends. It could be with your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, your aunt, your uncle, your child. A well-executed food hall will have something for everyone and will have an experience that's create your own. You want to run in and run out? You want to spend 2 hours there and nosh? You want to have a glass of wine and a slice of pizza, and your friend wants to have sushi and, a beer? Yeah. You can do it. And that's really ultimately like the major difference in a food court, right? A food court is I'm running in, I have 30 minutes, I'm eating food, fast food from something I know, and it's all about convenience, right? Whereas the food hall is a more artisan experience at its core.
I think that's amazing. I mean, you've described exactly how I've lived it. I never had a chance to really visit that many food halls until a couple opened up in my town. And I think, like you said, basically the food court, the classic food court is basically convenience. You're running errands, you're running around, you need to eat, that's fine. But there's two words that stick to me and what you describe for food hall is it's uniqueness and discovery. And that's how I felt when I visited the first one here. I was like, okay, I don't know what to try because I want to try so many things. And it brought me back 2-3 times in, the 2-3 weeks that followed because I was like, I want to go back. And one day I was in a bit of a rush. One day I did, like you said, grabbed a glass of wine, sat down and sunk in the atmosphere and the vibe. So thank you for kind of clarifying that, because I know for some people, sometimes it's like, is it just a new fancy word for the old food court? But the experience is much different. So You work, like you said, you represent in most of your projects the landlord or the builder behind it. Obviously, as a restaurant operator, there's always a point of view of, and when you're going to go rent a space, the landlord and me, right? There's that, not a confrontation, but not everybody's in a win-win frame of mind. Some deals are better than others, but a lot of times people feel like the other person in front of them wants to get something from them or squeeze the most out of them, but sometimes we don't necessarily understand the point of view of the other person. So since you're close to that, and we talk mainly on this show to restaurant operators and people that want to grow in our business, what are some of the challenges or things that maybe renters don't necessarily think about, but from the landlord point of view, that might not be understood by people? There are a few things you can share with it. Like you were talking before, how now, you guys build it to make it a destination. Obviously, that probably costs more than if you're just building, a cheap ceramic and paint in the 80s, and we didn't care about, the vibe and the environment and the atmosphere. But are there some challenges that from in your experience, that or things that you've had to explain many times to operators, that or misconceptions maybe, or stuff like that, that I think sometimes it's good to understand kind of both sides of the story?
Sure. Yeah. And uniquely, I've been on both sides. Actually, I've been on all three sides, right? I'm the landlord in some cases, I'm the tenant in some cases, and in some cases, I'm the broker representing one or the other. I think that, to your point, right, earlier, one of the biggest challenges often, if not always, is alignment, right? And making sure that everybody understands both the goals of both sides, but also the challenges of both sides. And oftentimes the challenge from a landlord perspective, and a lot of our partners and clients, is the economic capital stack, right? And the overall financing, in that it's not tied to any specific tenant or vendor, but the collection is. And I think oftentimes, I know as a restaurateur, right, I don't care about everybody else. I care about myself. I care about my employees. I care about my business. And it's challenging to understand that, this big bad landlord, right, is coming down hard on us. And, I'm the small guy. Well, the reality is, particularly COVID is a great example. What was pretty obvious early on to me is that any version of the restrictions that have been in place for COVID essentially means that the capital stack, from bank to landlord, landlord to tenant, tenant to employee, no one's being made whole. Everyone has to take a haircut. And not all vendors saw it that way. A lot of the restaurateurs felt like the burden fell on their shoulders, and that all the landlords should basically understand that. And the struggle, right, is that's on a one-off basis. I understand and I empathize, and it's been incredibly challenging for everyone. But most of our markets, every vendor was going through that, right? Which means that we weren't. I mean, there was a 3 to 4 or 5 month period in some of our markets we didn't collect any rent. So we were having similar conversations and challenges with our employees and our lenders and partners and banks. And it's that understanding and that empathy on both sides, that I think oftentimes, look, you're dealing in the restaurant world with very passionate people, and very emotional at times, tied to obviously the circumstances that have been going on. And I think that bringing that understanding that the landlord's typically not out there to get you, we want you to be successful. We want you to pay rent, right? And we understand that there are certain things that have to happen to do that. And we're trying to create an ecosystem that does that. I think the other challenge, as a sidebar to the capital for a second, vendors, tenants, tend to get out of their lane. And what I mean by that is, it's too easy in the restaurant industry to look at the guy next door or the girl across the street and be like, wow, they're killing it. Like, they're selling pizza. I should sell pizza. And then all of a sudden it cannibalizes not just the person across the street, but there's not enough market there for you either. And oftentimes the landlord understands and sees that and is trying to provide feedback. And I think it goes both ways. More often than not, unfortunately, a lot of the renters, the tenants, feel like they know it all. And I think understanding that we're often coming from a good place of, we want you to be successful. We want to see you be, profitable and pay your rent. And so our feedback is often coming from a good place, that I think is often falls on deaf ears, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's very interesting, because again, I think in any conversation, if you think the other, in any communication, the other person is all wrong and you're always right. I think you're missing the boat. Is that you need to see the point of view of everybody. There's people, there's vendors or operators that are unreasonable. There's landlords that are unreasonable. But I think most people in general, if you try to put yourself in the other person's shoes, you can understand that. And one point you made that I think is really interesting is that as a landlord, you want your renters, to be successful, right? Because they're there. The more people are successful, the more it makes the environment or that retail space successful. Also, I'm sure that there's probably a lot harder to have turnover and to have to find a new person and have that person set up in there than having somebody that's already set up being successful, right? So that's one thing that I think sometimes people forget, is that the same way that it's easier to bring in a restaurant, if somebody's sitting there, it's easier to have that person come back, right? To give them a good experience to come back than to find a new customer, a new guest to come in, right? The cost of acquisition is a lot easier if somebody's already there. So I'm sure that from your standpoint, it's a lot easier to help somebody that's already there be more successful, or to give them tips than to have, I'm sure, quite a bit of cost and turnaround and turnover, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've done quite a few openings, restaurant openings in my life. Not as many as you, from what I understand today. But every time I've had either, I'll say, a funny / weird / I haven't done an opening where something almost disastrous didn't happen. In everything you've seen, any weird or funny stories in some openings, or every opening I've done last minute, or either in the few days before or the few days after we open, something happened that caused us to basically not be able to operate or close to. Any stories that you've had in opening all these places?
I mean, look, to your point, it's not an opening if it doesn't have some sort of crazy challenge to overcome. I would say that the first one that comes to mind off the top of my head was we opened up a restaurant in Virginia, and this is years ago. And the liquor licensing in every market is a challenge,
yeah.
And there's some goofy situations whereby in Virginia, in order to officially acquire the license, you're required to submit, a process and go through administrative process. You can't actually start that process though, or really finish it, until you have your certificate of occupancy. So at that point, you're ready to open, but you're just starting the process. And candidly, we had hired someone to help me navigate that. But there were some elements of it that probably could have been better explained at the time. And needless to say, we had, executing a grand opening, typically starts weeks, if not months in advance, with invitations and, making sure you've got inventory and product and all those things. So what ended up happening with this particular situation is, because of the nuances of acquiring a license and announcing our opening, the day that we were opening, I was still scrambling to complete the liquor license process, and literally picked up the license at the office myself, and ended up taking a snapshot of it and sending it to our managers who are already at the liquor stores, because in Virginia, you have to actually go into the ABC stores to acquire your liquor license, your actual liquor.
So I need a copy of the license.
In the store, waiting for me to send them a picture so that they could actually get and purchase the liquor for the opening that was happening 2 hours later.
I've actually gone through the exact same thing. I worked for I guess 15, 16 years ago. I did an opening for a very large brand here in Canada. They have stores in the US, but we had a soft open starting at 4:00 with 200-300 people coming that night, and somebody had to drive through traffic to pick up the actual paper from the office, and we got it 15 minutes before the first guests were coming in, and we're like, what do we do if we can't serve booze tonight? But we got it last minute. And a funny one that I don't know if you've seen something like that. I'm not going to say who or where, but somewhere in Canada, that somebody had to have an extra bathroom on the main floor, because they didn't like that there was only bathroom downstairs, and I think it had something to do with accessibility, which is not very nice on their part. But basically, there's a lot of stairs, so they said you need to have a washroom on the first floor for us to give you the liquor license. So they actually built a washroom that they never connected the pipes to. The inspector came, saw the bathroom, signed off, they got the paper, and they demolished it before the opening, which I thought was completely crazy that actually worked. But yeah, a lot of crazy stuff in that world for sure. I'm sure that there's a million answers you could give to this, but if there's some general rules, I mean, when people are shopping for, there's a classic location, and I was actually having a conversation recently with someone, and he was saying, I'll shout out to Jensen, but he was saying it's about, the location, but the lease and the landlord and that whole relationship. And I thought that was really interesting. But
sure.
Are there any mistakes to avoid? I want to rent something. I want to build something. Either things that, if this happens, your red light should go up, or if it doesn't smell good, maybe you should run away. But from your experience, and you've been in all three seats, right? Like you said, as a broker, as a landlord, as an operator, what are some mistakes or maybe flags to avoid when you're looking for location? Maybe a couple of 2-3 tips you could share with us.
Sure. I mean, look, like you said, I mean, location is extremely important. What's been proven, though, over the course of time is a well-executed hospitality experience can be successful almost anywhere.
Yeah.
Location makes it easier, not easy, easier. But it's not vital, as long as the rest of the business is commensurate with whatever the structure is needing to be.
Yeah.
Financially, accessibility wise, parking, etc. And as you said, the deal, right? Ultimately, in most cases, the lease between the landlord and the restaurant or the tenant is really the foundation, right? And in a great lease, you never look at the lease after it's signed, ever.
Yeah.
And what that normally means is that both parties align their interests, and that the tenant is comfortably able to pay the negotiated rent. That the tenant, oftentimes really the biggest pitfall that we see, both as a landlord and as a food hall operator, cash flow is king, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, not even in non-COVID times, it's never going to be perfect. And there's so many circumstances outside of your control that it's not just good enough to have the money to just get open. You've got to have a reserve for rainy days, and there's going to be an ebb and a flow, even to the most successful businesses. And the best restaurateurs understand that, and it doesn't faze them because they've got the capital there just enough to manage those ups and downs.
It has to be part of the budget, right? You have to budget for it, like you would anything else.
Absolutely. And then, from a deal structure perspective, the big red flags are when you don't feel like the parties are aligned, where there's not a respect or an appreciation for what that group is bringing. And as the restaurateur, you've got to do your homework, and it's got to be your homework. I can't tell you how many times I've personally sat outside of other people's restaurants and literally counted, right? Or called the restaurateur. I mean, restaurateurs are typically pretty open, right? They're going to tell you what their covers are and what their check average is, and what their gross sales are, at least generally by the week. And you got to caveat it with, typically if you ask a restaurateur what their sales were last week, they'll literally give you last week's numbers, but that doesn't mean that that's what they do on average. That just means what they did last week.
Yep.
And I think that doing that homework and really understanding on your own, because I can't tell you how many times, we've worked on things and the restaurateur that we were working with, or again, has said, oh, well, I just took for granted that this was happening, or somebody else told me. And it's like, no, you got to do it yourself, and I really believe that. Same thing on the landlord side. We do the same homework. We're unique in the food hall world in that the market it's not really relevant to us. What happens around us, because these big things are so large and so unique that the volumes that we generate exceed any normal kind of restaurant parameter. So it really requires an extra level of homework to really understand things like capture rate, and really understand things like check average in the surrounding market, and really understand where and how people are coming, to make sure that that it works, and understand the food hall model economically, which is very different than the restaurant model. In that our average food hall vendor isn't building out the seating area. They're not building out the kitchen, the bathrooms or the back of house space. They're really only responsible for their kitchen area, and all the base infrastructure we've done. And with that, they're not required on the labor on maintaining, cleaning the bathrooms or common areas. And so the economics are just, the structure is different. And it's important that everybody, I think, understand up front how that works.
For sure. And again, like you said, different business model in a food hall than a sit down, traditional restaurant. Then it's a different model in a ghost kitchen. Then it's a different model in a food truck, right? They're different components in them. One thing I really like, just to pull out of what you said, is that, look, the whole thing about location, don't underestimate. Like I always say, ideas are great, and it doesn't come from me, but I forget who it comes from. But ideas are great, execution is hard, right? So if you execute properly in what would be considered a poor location, you can be successful. And if you have the perfect location and execution is poor and the experience is not there for your guests, you will fail. So it doesn't really matter. Are they general rules for you? Like there's some generalizations, when you talk about prime cost, trying to hit, the numbers are 60, 65%, the traditional food costs around 30 some odd, depending on what you do. It could be less depending what kind of restaurant you operate. But there's a general rule out there that, if you want to spend 5 to 7% on your rent, or maybe up to 10 with the energy and electricity and gas, do you have a ballpark that even, you've worked on as an operator, as a restaurant, do you have like some set guidelines that you try to go by when it comes to that?
In our food halls or in our restaurants?
I guess both, maybe. If they're different, that would show, again, like you said, they're different business models. So I'd be curious to know how that.
So in our restaurants, right, in the U.S., we typically want to keep our rents in the 8 to 10% range top line. Ideally, they're better than that, but you hope that
you don't want to go above that.
You're not above that. You then have CAM, taxes, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So your nets, so your gross rents, you traditionally want to see in that 8 to 12% range, right? Whereas in a food hall environment, most of our food halls, we execute in a 14 to 16% number. And that's a gross, right? And the reason the food hall works at that higher number is pretty simple. Your general occupancy and administrative costs are less. So in a typical restaurant, right, it's not uncommon to see your utilities, your labor tied to not food, but cleaning, maintenance, janitorial, things like that, get upwards of 8 to 10%. Whereas in a food hall, those same elements, your basic utilities, your cleaning, janitorial supplies, et cetera, typically is sub 4%. So ultimately, what we see in a food hall environment, the gross prime costs, right, are typically 2 to 4% less than in a restaurant environment, and your capital up front is almost a third. Because remember, in a food hall, an average 400 square foot stall typically has the ability to generate the same amount of volume as a store, retail, street front, 3 times its size, right? Yep. So 1,200 square feet in the United States is, comparable to something, somewhere in the neighborhood of, 400 to 600 square feet. And so the restaurateur is only responsible for building out the kitchen. And really, by building it out, they're only building out their equipment, the bar die wall, the sign, the menu, and they're opening for business. And so typically what we see is the food hall side capital up front is about a third of what it would cost in a street front retail location. And your prime costs are 2 to 4% less But the challenge, right, is you can't put a food hall everywhere.
Yeah.
And the most successful food halls require a certain collection of space in order to truly create that kind of veto-less environment. Whereas you don't necessarily need that in order to be successful with a restaurant, right? You can be a 1,200 square foot shop underneath of a building and be successful. You can't execute a food hall in 1,200 square feet. No. So that's kind of where we've seen it fall together for the most part. And the volume coming out of those two stores ends up, from a gross perspective, being typically the same, gross sales wise.
Very interesting. Obviously, from what you're saying, is that gross rent, that 14 to 16 in a food hall, you're basically just taking money you would spend in a different budget. Let's say you pay up to 10 in a regular restaurant, but you're paying 8 to 10 in maintenance and other things. You're basically grabbing part of that budget, and basically it's provided by your landlord. So it's just basically moving percentage around, but it's not necessarily more expensive. Exactly. It's just there's more that comes with it. So very interesting. Thank you for that. That's great insights.
Sure.
You've been in business 13 years. I'm curious to know, what would Michael Morris from 2021 tell Michael Morris from 2008? Any advice you would share with that younger Mike?
That's a good question. I think it's look, I think a lot of it comes down to understanding that this is playing the long game, right? And I understood it back then, but the reality is, look, we've been very fortunate to have a really great group of people that work with us and a great team in place. We got through COVID. We didn't lay off a single person. And I think that speaks to the kind of people and projects that we have. Yeah. That took a long time. It didn't happen overnight. People are often saying, "Oh, well, you've got 7 food halls. Like that's incredible." It's like, yeah, but we've been at this for like 13 years. That didn't, we just got started earlier in the process. And I think talking to myself and reiterating that, and also talking about, spending more time learning and empathizing, and just some character traits that I've continued to need to work on as an employer, as a leader, as a developer, and force myself to have started that process, I think, and be more self-reflective earlier would have been helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. I love like you said, we've been at it for a long time, right? It seems the classic, it's an overnight success. Well, most overnight successes are about 10 years in the making usually, right? So I love that. Yeah. People's perception sometimes, oh my God, look at what they have. Yeah, but there's a lot of work, behind that. So maybe on a more personal note, but just to, discover what brought you there. Who are 3 people that you would say have had the best, or maybe the most influence in your life to bring you where you are today?
Well, look, I would say, kind of in no specific order, my wife and my parents, for sure.
Yeah.
In that my wife and I have been together for over 25 years. We started dating junior year of high school.
In high school.
And so, I'm very fortunate to have a partner in life who, challenges me every day to be better.
Yeah.
And loves me no matter what, and supports me, but challenges me to be better. Yeah. And I think, my parents definitely instilled a lot of, the work ethic and the thought and, the values that I have in life. And I use all of that, all 3 of their lessons, I guess, every day.
That's amazing. I think in the 5 minutes before we went on air, you quoted 2, 3 expressions from your dad. He seems like a fun character, I must say. Yeah. You threw a couple of things at me there that were great. And in the last 12 years, in that same line of growth and learning, what's your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it, like professionally? Anything that you're like, okay, I definitely had one intent or one way I think this was going, and that's maybe changed how you approach things and how you do them, how you basically approach your work now?
Sure. I don't know about my biggest failure, but we were early on expanding one of our restaurant concepts, and I allowed others to convince me to do something, despite the fact that I didn't agree with it. And I think that it fortunately, I was in a situation where, I was still able to pay my bills, and still kept the company going. It definitely financially hurt a lot, but it didn't take me down, and I was very lucky in that regard. But it definitely taught me the lesson of stick to your gut, and also stick to your wheelhouse. It pulled me too far away from things that I love and focus on. And I think that's kind of why the company has been so successful in general otherwise, is because, we have this incredible mission. I mean, we help communities and help develop and support neighborhoods in a meaningful way that we can wake up every morning and be excited to go do, and allow, us to be very creative and unique in what we do. And we can make money at it.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty awesome combination, right? And so why deviate from that?
Yeah, like you said before with other people, right? Stay in your lane, stay in like you said, your wheelhouse, right? That's the recipe for success. So many people, I learned that late in life, but so many people focus on trying to, strengthen their weaknesses. And at some point I came across something that says, no, double down on your strengths, because that's where you're good at, and maybe surround yourself with people that are maybe better where you're not. And since I've been doing that, it's funny how I feel my life has gotten easier, or I've gotten more perform better, because sometimes doubling down on your strengths, you get that much more out of it than just trying to strengthen some places where you're not in your best at your best.
Sure.
Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. What's you've said it. You worked in the restaurant industry as an operator, as landlord, as a broker. What's your 80-20 on the restaurant business? What's the core of what's the most? I mean, I already get a gist out of our conversation today, but what makes restaurants successful? We talked the different concepts. There's different things, but there's some practices may change, right? Whether it's a sit down, whether it's a different concept, how people reserve, how people order online, but there's some core principles to our business. What's your 80-20 on the restaurant business?
I mean, it simply comes down to people and product.
Yeah.
Right. If you've got great people, and that means management, that means service, that means cooks, that means hosts, that means consultants. I mean, it's everybody. You can get away with mediocre product. If you've got great product, you can get away with other things. If you have both, you're going to be wildly successful.
Yeah.
And the reality is the average consumer seeks out those things. To do that though, right? I mean, we call it the 3 Ps. It's people, product, and passion. Because if you don't have passion, it doesn't matter how good the people are. It doesn't matter how good the product is. It will eventually fizzle, because the reality is every industry, but particularly the hospitality industry, is hard.
Yeah.
And if you're not passionate about it, no matter how good you are. I know lots of really talented chefs that, fizzle after a period because the passion's just not there. I know really talented, restaurateurs and owners that eventually just don't do it anymore. You got to have all 3.
That's amazing. People, product, and passion, and the passion part, that fire has to be there. Another thing I discovered along the line, but as I grew up and as I got older, is that maybe I used to rely on my talents too much, but somebody told me the world is full of talented people that accomplish nothing, yet some hardworking people, some passionate people that maybe didn't even have as much skills that other people have accomplished great things. So the passion behind it is really important. As we wind down here, I want to do some rapid fire with you. Maybe more on thanks for the great insight. Maybe more on a more personal side. Do you ever like to have a drink? I guess, if you're
Sure.
doing that. Are you more a wine, beer, or spirits kind of guy?
I'm probably best described as a seasonal social drinker. So what, first of all, I love having a good drink with people.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what is for me. And I think, very specifically, like if I'm not eating,
Yeah.
and it's the fall or winter, you're probably going to see bourbon in my glass. If it's the spring or the summer, you're probably going to see it in my glass. The classics, I don't particularly like anything that's got more than 3 ingredients, and one of those is ice. And if I'm eating food and I'm with my wife, it's probably Pinot Noir, and otherwise it's an Italian red.
Beautiful. Pinot Noir from Burgundy, or you're not picky?
I'm not very, like, my wife really, really enjoys Pinot. And so we often, we've gotten very heavily into the Washington State recently and in California, but like we love a good Burgundy. So
there's some
and
great
the same
stuff.
Thing with the Italian. She'll dabble and she'll let me occasionally pour a good Italian for her as well.
For sure. There's some great stuff in Washington State for sure, and some beautiful Pinots around there.
Yes.
Any favorite bourbon? Any go-to?
You're gonna laugh. So my go-to is probably Old Bardstown or Old Tub.
Okay.
Frankly, for the price,
Great
you
value.
can't beat them. Yeah, incredible. Like, and look, I've had Pappy. I've had Willet. I enjoy a good rye. My friend is the president of Sagamore Whiskey, and I think they make an incredible rye, and we enjoy that and love supporting local manufacturers, and bringing something like that back into the state of Maryland has been awesome to see. And more importantly, it's a great product. But more often than not, if I'm drinking bourbon, it's a wheated bourbon. I was fortunate when I was at the Cordish Company, previous to starting my own business, to help as part of the team opening up the Maker's Mark Bourbon House and Lounge with Bill Samuels IV back then, and Dave Pickerel, who passed away a couple of years ago, but was the master distiller at the time and was also involved with brands like Whistle Pig, as an example, and really had an opportunity to sit at their feet and learn about bourbon and rye and taste. Because of that experience, I've probably had north of 250 bourbons and similar ryes. So it was an incredible experience and opportunity, and gave me a real passion for it and an appreciation for it. I know the difference between really bad bourbon and good bourbon, but it doesn't have to be expensive either.
Yeah, there's some good value there. There's some good products that you can find. You've been there, you've lived it, but for those who watch us, I just recently watched, there's an amazing documentary on Amazon Prime, and I forget the name of it, but just type bourbon in Amazon Prime, and the cinematics of it are beautiful. And I'm sure there's a few people you mentioned in there that are in that documentary, but I've always been curious and would love to do the whole, I think it's Bourbon Trail or whatever. Sure. But that documentary on Amazon Prime was very enjoyable. A really nice hour to spend, and makes you want to have a little something to sip while you're watching this, for sure. From your standpoint, a lot of backlash, obviously, on the high fees when it comes to third-party delivery, the Uber Eats, the DoorDash. For you, a big no or a necessary evil?
We've been very fortunate in that because of our scale, we've been able to negotiate reasonably better rates.
Yeah.
That have at least made it not a loss leader.
Okay.
And I think that's the challenge, right? Is how do you figure out a model where it's at least a break-even analysis for everybody? And I think it's a necessary evil. Delivery is not going away anywhere. You asked me about what the changes have been, in the last 20 years. The delivery systems didn't exist, right? Drizzly, I couldn't get liquor delivered anywhere. And now I can have it delivered to my doorstep in like an hour. It's not going anywhere. I think the challenge is figuring out how to make it an economically feasible model for everyone. I don't think anyone's figured that out yet. I think that will continue to be a challenge. And it's one, as both a restaurateur and as a food hall operator, we are constantly trying to solve and work with both our vendors and with the third-party apps, and been working actively with groups like Bebot and SnackPass, our competitors, and testing their products out in different markets. Been actively working with all the major delivery service providers like Caviar and Grubhub, and trying to solve that and help them together. And I think that's what it's taking. It's taking a teamwork approach that it can't sit on one side of the ledger It's got to work for everybody.
Amazing. Good. Very good point of view is that it's important for everybody to make it work, right? We need to make it financially viable for everyone, and it needs to work. Time's flying down. So let me, I said rapid fire, and these are amazing answers you're giving me. So let me plow through a couple more here.
Sure.
The best trip you've ever taken?
For my 40th birthday and my wife's 40th birthday, we took our entire family and friends for 2 weeks to Italy. And we spent a week in a villa in Cortona, and then several days traveling up and down Italy. And it was a trip I'll never forget. I don't think my children will ever forget, even though they were young when we did it. And I can't wait to go back.
I wish I was your friend. Sounds like it's amazing. Favorite restaurant, one of yours and one that's not part of your company's? I know of yours is probably hard because you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but
yeah, it's okay. It's like your children. You love them all. You just love some of them more at times than others, depending on what's going on in life. You still love them all. I would say for restaurants right now, I love our concept, Iron Rooster. It's a Southern-inspired diner concept, 3-day parts, breakfast-inspired, although we do have a full dinner menu and a full bar. It's just a fun concept. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We have a great operating team and group of partner investors in the business. We have 4 of the units now open and operating, and excited to see where that business goes over the next couple of years. As far as favorite restaurant, personally, outside of the businesses we're involved in, I would tell you that it comes down to what experience am I looking for?
At that moment.
And if you're just saying, what's the best dining experience I've ever had in my life? My dad and I had a dinner at French Laundry 10 years ago that still ranks as one of the top meals I've ever had in my life. And I remember every course. I would tell you that in Baltimore, the Atlas Restaurant Group is executing some of the best restaurants, I think, in the country right now. You could literally close your eyes and walk into any one of them and open them, and you wouldn't be able to tell me where you were in the world, which I think is a hallmark of a great operator. We're about to open a restaurant called Watershed in one of our public markets, Carl Street Market in Baltimore. It will become my new favorite. Just looking at the menu, looking at the physical space, knowing who the operator is, it's going to be special.
That's amazing. 3 words that describe you.
3 words that describe me. Hardworking. Vigilant, creative.
Some pretty good stuff. I like that. If you could have dinner with anyone you'd like to sit down with and pick their brains for a couple hours.
The first 3 people that popped to mind would be living for a second. Would be the sage of Omaha, Mr. Buffett. Jeff Bezos and Danny Meyer.
Danny Meyer, it's amazing. I was on the phone with Richard Corrine, his partner, yesterday, and it's going to come on a Table 21 eventually. I'm really excited to have them. I love Union Square Hospitality. I think that I love what they do. Last question. We've gone a little bit over time. You mentioned before you enjoy Netflix. Any favorite series you're watching right now that you want to throw our way?
Any favorite series? So I just finished watching The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan series. I think even if you're not into sports, it's
great.
It's an incredible piece, and I really like it. I am blanking on the name. Ozark. I can't wait for it to come back. My wife and I, it was supposed to come out a couple of weeks ago with their new season.
They've all been delayed with filming, right?
So they've gotten delayed, which is just frustrating. But I would say, Ozark for sure. I obviously love Chef's Table and have watched every single one of those. I would also tell you they have an interesting series of documentaries that on the surface you have to I've had to force myself to look at or watch, and I have found them wildly entertaining and fairly interesting. There's one on Tony Robbins. There's one on Steve Aoki. If you don't know who Steve is, he's a EDM DJ, but his dad was actually the founder of Benihana. And they're just they're 1 hour-ish, and they're just generally interesting. You learn something new, and I think they're just appreciative of that experience. They have one on Avicii. They're just well done, I think.
Is the Tony Robbins one the I'm Not Your Guru?
Yes.
The one you mean? Yeah, I've seen that. It was really interesting, and I'll definitely check out the other two. Michael, this has been a really interesting talk. As you talked, I probably added 20 questions to my list that I would love to ask you. But thank you so much for your insights. CANAdev, Michael Morris, people can find you. If there was one project that people are watching that you would want them to take a peek at or to visit if they're in the area, anyone you want to shout out before we go?
I'm looking forward to opening up in Boston. High Street Place is going to be an absolute world-class experience. And then right behind that, I'm going to add two because I have to, is Western Market, right at the doorstep of George Washington University's campus. Those are both opening fairly imminently right now, and we're just excited to get there.
That's amazing. We wish you tremendous success in those projects and all the 14, I think, upcoming projects you had. Thanks for coming on today, and wishing you a great day and wishing everybody watching a great day. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It was great to talk to you. I look forward to being in touch.
Beautiful. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Have a good one.